Okay, here we go. This is our prediction. If you didn't check out the first video, we did a little bit of an introduction, background on some of the themes of the election. I'll put a link to that in the description. This is the predictive discussion. We're going to talk about our predictions for the 2016 election just 2 days away. So I'll start it off with talking about what I believe is the solid territory for Clinton and the solid territory for Trump. So, um, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, uh, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Georgia, and South Carolina and Alaska are going to be solid Trump. That will give him a foundation of 180 electoral votes. Uh, for Clinton, Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Those are solid for Clinton. These are my estimates, and that would give Clinton a foundation of 182 electoral votes. So they both have right around the same solid base that they're drawing from. Now, do you have any? Do you think that that's accurate?
I think that's accurate. What two things I would just interject with. One is there is a member of the Electoral College in Washington State who has said that he will not vote for Hillary Clinton. I don't know if you saw that. He didn't say what he was going to do. It wasn't going to be for Donald Trump, but he was a passionate Bernie Sanders supporter and felt that Hillary Clinton is so corrupt that he cannot possibly vote for her. So, assuming that he stays as a member of the college to vote, that could bring up an interesting scenario if the college vote is close, because Hillary Clinton would be losing one electoral college vote. So I'm not. Were you aware of that?
I actually was not aware of that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, and certainly. So the last time we saw such a scenario was in 2004, when I don't remember which state, but a member of the Democrats voted for, I believe, John Edwards instead of John Kerry. It didn't have any impact on the election, but we very well could see that impact this election.
Sure.
So if you can scratch off one of those college votes unless the Democrats act to remove this guy. Um,
There's a term
so
for
I,
that. What's the term for that when an electoral delegate votes not for their candidate that they were supposed to?
there is a term for it, and I was looking at it today, and I completely
That's
slipped my
no
mind.
problem. We know what it is.
It's
Um,
obviously it doesn't happen enough that it's common knowledge, even among people who pay attention to this sort of thing. And the second thing I would like to bring up out of all of those states, and you and I have talked about this before, but out of all of those states that are solidly for Clinton, I think it's going to go for Clinton, but I would actually give Connecticut a somewhat minute chance to actually go for Trump. So mark that. If Connecticut does go for Trump, you can all look back on this and say how smart I was, but I think it will go for Clinton. But out of all of those states, um, Connecticut, because of there's a lot of blue collar people in Connecticut. There's a lot of Trump supporters in Connecticut, and you never know what can happen.
yeah, I don't think with the New York City metro area influence, though, I don't think that that'll be the case. But it is noted. So I'm going to now. These are predictions that I'm making now. I'm basing them primarily on polls and averages of polls. But Nevada, Arizona, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and New Hampshire, I'm going to call for Trump. And I'm also going to call one of the split electoral votes in Maine. I think that those are going to go for Trump. Any comments on those?
No, I would actually put Arizona in the solid Republican category, but I do agree it's going to go for Trump, and I really don't have any issues with anything else. Although, I would actually give the entire state of Maine again, I'm not saying it's likely, but I would actually give the entire state of Maine a somewhat chance to actually all go for Trump. Um, so I would put that in the Connecticut category, but maybe slightly more of a chance than Connecticut. But yes, I agree with everything else.
Oh yeah, I think Maine definitely has more of a chance of going Trump than Connecticut. And
Yeah, they're kind of interesting people up there. You never know how they're going to go.
okay, so on the other side of that, states that I am going to give to Clinton, I'm going to predict that they're going to go for Clinton. The other three electoral votes for Maine and Wisconsin and Minnesota. That's what I'm going to give to Clinton. Predictive.
Yeah, I think Wisconsin. Uh, it seems like a state that would that Trump. I think Trump is going to do well in Wisconsin. I think he's going to do better than Mitt Romney. He's going to do better than John McCain. I don't think he's going to win it in the end. He might have won it had he had the cooperation of Paul Ryan and some of the conservative radio hosts in Wisconsin. But yeah, I would call that for Clinton. Although Minnesota, I think I would put that in a based on the polls. I know that's what you said you're going off of. It looks like it's going to go for Clinton, but based on sort of intangible things outside of the poll, I would actually put that in a toss-up category.
I would be very happy to see any of these blue states, and of course, Minnesota is historically very blue. They have not voted Republican since 1972, so that would be a real shift. Um, It'd be very interesting to see if that happened. I know there was that story about the high schoolers that came out of Minnesota that were all crazy for Trump. Of course, they're not a voting age yet, most of them. Um, but I think that it will. I think that it will go for Clinton.
Well, it's Congressional District 8, I believe, in Minnesota, which is pretty heavily Democratic, but it's also working class. They're polling very well for Trump, very high for Trump, more so than Clinton. And the Democrat congressman there is in one of the tightest, closest races in the country for Congress, which is surprising considering how Democrat it is. It's not necessarily liberal. It's just Democrat, like heavily Democrat. And if that is a trend that we see throughout other parts of the state, because Minnesota in general is more of a working class Democrat state. You could argue New Jersey is a state that's just in general liberal, but I think Minnesota is just sort of a moderate Democrat, even though they vote for Democrats every time. It's more of a working class, and I Trump was in Minnesota today, Minneapolis, and he had upwards of 20,000 people at his rally in Minnesota. And this is the first time, I believe, in the general election that he's been to Minnesota. And he made that decision within the last day, basically. And considering how important states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, Nevada are, the fact that he made room for a stop in Minnesota tells me that they must have some kind of internal polling that indicates that it's pretty close. But again, this is just you can't see this based off of polls. This is more of an instinct or a hunch I have.
Right, certainly. And this is one of those elections where I think there will be some surprises. I really believe that. Um, I think that it's. I could see it easily turning into election night could be one of those nail biters where you're kind of just like waiting for the Southwest to vote, or it could be over at 10 o'clock. uh, Eastern time. So it's really interesting just to see how things have been changing, how perspectives on the ground have been changing. Now, I want to say that I do believe that, I mean, some of the polls that were coming out were really, really skewed. I mean, we're talking about 15 points of difference between some of these polls. Clearly, there is something not right that's going on there. So I believe that some of that was engineering and trying to manipulate and suppress motivation. But now that we're getting closer to the election, a lot of these polling institutions have it's in their best interest to have their final numbers at least a little bit closer to what really happens, and we're seeing some of those numbers change. But in addition to that, we must always remember that the polls do not measure turnout. They only measure people who they think are likely voters. Now, sometimes they oversample certain demographics and groups, and you still get some pretty wacky figures. But even if they are accurate across the board, we still have to remember that on the election, the day of the election, that the voter turnout is what is going to determine the outcome. I mean, some of these states that are historically blue could very well flip red if Trump voters come out just maybe 5 or 10% more than Hillary voters do. And I think that's totally possible considering how just fed up people are with establishment politicians.
Yeah, or if traditional Democrat voters turn out even 3% less, and Trump gets the same amount of votes that say Mitt Romney got, which he won't. He will blow Mitt Romney's total out of the water, whether he wins or not. All it takes is Hillary Clinton to lose a small percentage of votes, and she very well could lose a lot of states. But not to get too far off on the tangent, but yeah, you mentioned the polls. I think that's important for people to understand is not only is there oversampling going on where you people need to understand that polling agencies uh, have to make assumptions in their polling in order to weight polls. So if they poll, a random sampling of 500 people, the raw data may show that Trump is winning by, 5%, let's say. But if the pollsters assume that the turnout is going to be similar to, say, in 2012, where even though Barack Obama had less enthusiasm than he did in 2008, he had more than Mitt Romney did. So they're going to weight the Democrats higher based on what they assume is going to be a turnout. The turnout, they think that maybe Latino voters will turn out higher or lower or the same. So there's a lot of assumptions going on in these polls, and this is such a very different election than we've ever seen in modern history that it's difficult to go based off of 2012 numbers where you have a very traditional and frankly boring Republican candidate who is as exciting as a wet tissue, and Barack Obama, who, at that point the luster and the celebrity was starting to wear off of the first black president who could campaign well. So the polls are, I think, are generally generally, I don't know if they're going to be accurate this election season. And we've seen so far in the primary, a lot of them haven't been. Trump has been, in his primary states, have generally done better than what the polling indicates he would. And in a place like Michigan, in the Democrat primary, all of the Real Clear Politics average had her winning by several percentage points, and she ended up losing. So the it's difficult to rely on polls, but really it's the only thing we have to go by, just in any kind of scientific way.
Yes, and hopefully, yeah, we want to differentiate the difference between scientific polls and polls that are conducted, a survey monkey or somebody standing out in the street with a clipboard. Very different methodology there and different accuracy. I'm glad you brought up the primary because another thing we want to remember is that Trump brought out voters to historic levels during the primary, and he had over a dozen candidates in his opposition. Huge amounts of support. Another thing you want to mention as well. Sounds kind of trite, but I think there's something to it. If you go on Facebook, you'll find, and Facebook is the most used social media site. It's going to be a lot more popular with a younger crowd. Younger crowd is supposed to be more progressive, more liberal, would tend to vote for Hillary. But if you go on Facebook, you'll find that Trump has, the last time I checked, it was about 3 or 4 million more uh, likes than Hillary Clinton. That's pretty significant to me because that says that he has a lot more support among a younger demographic than what we would potentially think would occur. Plus, comparing again to Romney, Trump is, for all his scandals and flaws, he's a dynamic, interesting character. A lot of people enjoy and are entertained by his personality. Romney was very boring, very boring. I mean, and not as boring as maybe John McCain, but incredibly, incredibly boring. And again, we're seeing this rejection of this typical politician kind of archetype that it seems that so many people in the media and in establishment America just assume that the people want. They want this very sterile, non-human, flawless, highly polished person who can be a figurehead, and people are kind of tired of that. I think that they want to see somebody that they feel they could actually have a conversation with about real issues in their lives. And Trump, I think, definitely fits that better than Hillary Clinton does. So I think that'll also play a role on Tuesday night. Additionally, the black vote is down right now. We're getting a number of indicators that are suggesting that blacks are just disenfranchised with Hillary. They don't. Obviously, not all, but it's down. It's lower than in previous elections, and that would indicate that she just does not have the ability to reach them. Maybe that has something to do with how she patronizes them and puts on a fake accent when she's talking to them. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that she goes on black radio shows and talks about how she takes hot sauce with her all over the place. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that she's made racist comments in the past, and maybe all those things are starting to settle in. But for whatever reason, blacks are not as interested in her as definitely as she would like. So that's another reason why that could be that 3% you're talking about, just enough to suppress her voting base.
There's already indications that Trump will double, if not more, Mitt Romney's total for blacks. And if Trump gets 15% of the black vote, that's devastating for Hillary Clinton, especially considering the fact that the black vote for her is down. We saw that in the primaries. She does not connect with the black community, and we see that a lot of black church leaders have come out and endorsed Donald Trump. He's doing well with the black community. Maybe that has to do with the fact that he goes to them and says, "Look, I know what the problem is. It's the fact that you can't walk down the street without getting shot. It's not the fact that you don't have enough food stamps or you don't have enough welfare. It's the fact that you don't have a job. You don't have security." And I think that's resonating with them. And we already see that Trump is doing well with all minority votes compared to Mitt Romney. I mean, he may even triple the Latino vote of Mitt Romney and John McCain. He may get upwards of George W. Bush in 2000 when he did all right with the Latino vote. And considering the Latino vote is considerably more than it was in the year 2000, that's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also is a testament to the fact that people just aren't buying into this racist, sexist, xenophobic, constant barrage of "you're a racist, you're a racist, you're a racist." People are getting sick of that. And the minorities are very well smart enough to understand that a lot of this is nonsense. And they want somebody just like the typical white American voter. If you don't have a job, if you're worried about your future, you want somebody who's going to fix that problem. You don't want to just sit around and wallow in how offended you are while while you're starving to death. uh, people want solutions at this point.
Well, that's absolutely true. And people, I think the black community just finds him more authentic than Hillary Clinton. I mean, nobody believes she's sincere about anything other than how to enrich herself. So it's people people like Donald Trump's crass personality. I mean, I don't know what other way to put it. I mean, Hillary Clinton is running campaign commercials saying how unfit Donald Trump is to be president because he tells people they can go fuck themselves. But I think that's exactly why people like him. And I think that's actually a campaign commercial for Donald Trump. And, working class people talk like that. A lot of people in the black community talk like that. A lot of people in the poor white community and middle class white community talk like that. I mean, they can connect with that. So he's doing better. He's going to do very well with the black community. He's going to do well with the Latino community, and he's going to do well with working class Democrat communities. So I think that's why you're going to see these traditional blue states or even sort of purple states possibly go for it.
Absolutely. So let's
So
let's talk about some of those
yes,
purple states. So, with my predictions that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I have Donald Trump at 241 electoral votes and Hillary Clinton at 205 electoral votes. Now I know that's kind of the opposite of what a lot of these like RCP and 270 to win are saying. They have these Clinton far ahead, but I believe there's some inaccuracies in some of their predictions. And now I just gave the rundown on those. I'll just go again as far as the the states that I'm going to call for Trump. I'm going to call again Nevada, Arizona, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, and New Hampshire. And one of those main votes I'm going to call for Trump. For Clinton, I'm going to call Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the remainder of the three main votes. Now that leaves New Mexico, Colorado, Florida, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. And there's a lot of big states in there.
just to clarify, you are calling New Hampshire for Donald Trump.
I'm calling it for Donald Trump. Yes.
Interesting, interesting. Um, why do you think that is, real quick?
Um, Several, actually, if I'll bring up on Real Clear Politics, all of the recent polls conducted in New Hampshire show him ahead. All of them. There's two that show him as a tie, and I am going to say I've called several of these states for Trump because um, anytime I see a state that leans Trump or is at a tie, I'm calling it for Trump automatically because I think the voter turnout is going to be enough to push it over the edge. So we have New Mexico, Colorado, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Florida. Now, who would have thought that Virginia would be potentially in play?
Yeah,
So that's a big. Now I know that the polls for Virginia right now they have Clinton with roughly about a 5-point lead, but that's enough for me to say that that could potentially turn red. It could potentially turn red. Now Virginia hasn't gone red. Well, it was 2004. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, they voted for Bush twice, so I think that Virginia could possibly swing for Trump, and that would be monumental.
right. And with Virginia, it's the northern neck of Virginia, the metro area outside of D.C., where all the politicians live and the corporate fat cats like Carly Fiorina have their mansions. That is the location that we see that votes heavily Democrat.
Oh, and let's to be clear, if we look at an electoral vote or a presidential vote distribution map at the county level, but of the entire United States, you will see that that trend is almost universal. Aside from a few areas, specifically mainly in New England and a few in the Great Lakes region, but for the vast majority, Democrats get probably 90% of their support from urban areas. So that is a trend we'll see across the board. And that's the only reason that Illinois is blue, right? It's Chicago.
Right, right, and same thing with like places like Pennsylvania, but Virginia. I think what you have is you have a battle of the rest of the state and the northern neck that likes their cushy government jobs and handouts. I mean, these are rich people. I'm not talking like poor Democrat communities or black communities that are voting Democrat. This is wealthy elites who have their illegal immigrant maids and gardeners vote Democrat. That's sort of the stronghold. That's how the current governor, who's a total Clinton lackey right now, Terry McAuliffe, that's how he was elected. Otherwise, his challenger was 2014, Ken Cuccinelli. He did really well in pretty much all of the state except the northern neck. And of course, Terry McAuliffe is notorious for things like voter fraud, so that probably helped him. Um, but yeah, I think if Trump can turn out the vote and turn out non-traditional Republican support, such as working class, some in the black community, and the rest of the state, I think that minus any voter fraud, that would overcome the northern neck. So I think Virginia is going to be really close. I'm not sure if he's going to win it. I'm not ready to call it yet, but I think it's going to be really close one way or the other.
I agree with that statement. I'm also not willing to call it. It is a true swing state as far as my estimates are concerned. But if he took Virginia, that would certainly give him a huge advantage. Um, but I think it is possible. It is totally possible at this point.
So, for the sake of argument, do you want to leave it as a swing state, or do you want to just put it in Clinton category?
I'm leaving it as a swing state. If I had to
Okay.
call it, if I had to call it, I would say it's Clinton. But I think that there could be a surprise in Virginia potentially. Um,
Yes.
so I would say that. I'll just that it's each one of these states we're going to be talking about now is really its own case. So I'll say Virginia, likely Clinton, but could be a surprise there.
Yes.
Okay, Florida. Obviously, Florida extremely important. So in the recent polls in Florida, we see Clinton with a very slight lead, or roughly around a tie. Now, there is a poll from Remington Research that came out that has Trump with 4 points ahead. Now, balancing all those out, Clinton, on the RCP average, at least, Clinton is +1. So, Florida, very, very, very important. Now, Clinton, Trump could still win without Florida. It is actually possible now that all these swing states have opened up in the past week, but it would not be good for him to lose Florida. Now, Florida voted for Obama twice, also voted for Bush twice. It has gone back and forth over the years between Democrat and Republican consistently throughout history. So, Florida is, I want to say that it is more likely for Trump, but there is still a possibility he could lose the state.
Yeah, I would actually go as far as to say if he loses Florida, it, I mean, if you were to ask me a week ago, I would say if he lost Florida, he wasn't going to win. Um, just because, not just from the electoral standpoint, but if he can't win the popular vote in Florida, I would have a hard time seeing him win the popular vote in other states. But yeah, you're right. With Pennsylvania opening up and Michigan, and I mean, he could technically afford to lose Florida, but I'm still leaning towards if he loses Florida, he won't win. Do I think he will win? I actually would call Florida for Trump. I mean, it's Trump has a lot of business. He has what, couple golf courses there. He has a lot of business ties there. I think the main Clinton stronghold is the Miami-Dade County area, and that's where you see the bulk of the Democrat support. Now, what's important to note is that Florida is a red state, even though they went for Obama twice. They have a Republican controlled legislature, they have a Republican governor. It's red in the vast majority of the state. So Trump, if he can manage to keep his enthusiasm in the state to actually get out and vote for him, I think he will win it. And I would actually myself call it for him, despite what the polls say. And one of the most interesting examples of this is a couple days ago, both Clinton and Trump um, had rallies in Florida, and Tim Kaine had a rally in Florida. He had like 30 people at his rally, and Trump had three times, four times the amount of people at than Clinton did. I mean, we see that everywhere. It's not just in Florida, but I mean, the enthusiasm is there for Trump. I mean, he did. He was down at one of his golf courses recently in Florida, and all of his employees came out to say how much they liked him, and he was great. He was good to work for. And this was impromptu. It wasn't like some photo op orchestrated by the campaign. It was something the employees decided to do on their own. And I think that rubs off on people. And I think what you'll see is the western half and the panhandle of Florida is going to go heavily for Trump, and it's just the eastern side of Florida, and that you see a lot of the people who move from New York and Massachusetts. They move down there and take their liberal nonsense with them. Um, but yeah, I think if he can, sort of like with Virginia, if he can get out the vote in most of the state, that would be enough to overcome the Miami-Dade area and some of the other parts of eastern Florida. But there is voter fraud. I mean, I've been
Yes.
saying that all along here, and there's been actual arrests in the last week of county officials who have been enacting voter. I mean, there's people who there's whole thousands of absentee ballots that have been filled out by county officials. I mean, there's a lot of voter fraud, despite having a lot of mechanisms in through various state laws that would prevent it. So
Very important to mention it. I wanted to mention that
yes,
earlier in that these predictions are assuming a mainly fair election. Now, I believe fully that there's going to be voter fraud. What we need to have happen for Trump to win is that he does not win by a small margin. If he wins by a very small margin, they may be able to rig it enough to eliminate that margin. But if it's by a large margin, it'll be too overwhelming. It'll be too difficult to rig. And all the different state systems, all the different votes, different demographic areas. Um, I do believe that there is going to be voter fraud for sure. It's just a matter of how extensive it'll be. We are witnessing the establishment desperately try to cling to life, and Trump is a major threat to that. So they're going to try everything that they can to not allow that to happen. We need to be aware of that.
right. And this isn't just some pie in the sky conspiracy theory. I mean, thanks to Project Veritas and WikiLeaks, we know that there is voting fraud. We know that there is voter fraud, and the Democrat Party is part of voter fraud. They orchestrate voter fraud. So the question is, how how is the voter fraud going to go? I think if the election, the popular vote ends up very close, I think there will be enough voter fraud to turn it to Clinton. So Trump has to win convincingly in the popular vote category. But as far as Florida, yes, I would actually call it for Trump.
Okay. So you call Florida for Trump. I'm going to say if I was pressed on it, I believe that the voter turnout will overcome that slight polling lead that Clinton has, assuming those polls are accurate. I think that it will go for Trump. And I agree with your statement earlier that essentially Florida is kind of like a testing zone. Like if you can't win Florida, you have problems elsewhere. Not that Florida is a special. It said essentially Florida is a nice way of looking at the country. If you win Florida, you're likely to be able to motivate other people elsewhere. I do agree with that. So let's move on to another state that we didn't think would be in play at all this election, and that is Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is now Hillary has been falling in the polls consistently in Pennsylvania, and the most recent polls we have Clinton with a 2.4 point lead, in Pennsylvania, according to the aggregates. Now, we have four polls. Two of them give them a +2, Clinton a +2, two of them give her a +4. Those are polls conducted the end of October into early November. The latest poll, which was conducted on November 2nd and 3rd, actually has a dead tie in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is very much in play. That is anything with it that is 3%, usually 3%. Some of these polls are not so reputable, so it's 5%. But usually within 3%, that's margin of error. Could swing either way, just to the error of the poll, and that is not including or factoring in again voter turnout. So if Philadelphia stays home, obviously not everybody, but if Philadelphia, if there's not a lot of voting going on, if there's suppressions, essentially 5 to 10% of typically Democratic voters just don't go to the polls because they're disgusted with Hillary, and or the more rural areas of the state really get out and are highly mobilized, that could swing Pennsylvania very easily to Trump territory.
Right, definitely. Pennsylvania is in a lot of ways a red state. I think even with Pittsburgh, which is a Democrat city, of course, like pretty much all cities, um, I think if you cut out Philadelphia, you have a deep red state. So with Philadelphia, yeah, I have no doubt. Philadelphia, no matter what the voter turnout is there, it's going to go probably 70% for Hillary Clinton. I mean, there's no way Trump is going to win the city of Philadelphia in a million years. But despite that, I think he's going to do well. Actually, I I've always thought Pennsylvania was in play for Trump. I wasn't sure if he was going to win it, but I've always considered it a swing state. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that I was convinced he was actually going to win it. Um, with Pennsylvania, the currently in Pennsylvania, you have a heavily Republican dominated Congress. You do have a Democrat governor, but there's reasons why the previous Republican governor was voted out that has nothing to do with demographics or the amount of Democrats in the state. You had up until recently a heavily Republican Supreme Court. You have a Republican senator. He is in a tight race right now for re-election, but there's a lot of indications that um, that Republicans will, I think, mobilize for Donald Trump. Now, in the primary, uh, what's interesting about that is Donald Trump pretty much won every part of the state. And I know one thing people are concerned about as far as Trump supporters are how the Philadelphia suburbs are going to vote, the counties that surround Philadelphia County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Delaware County. But Trump won these pretty handily in the primary. So the moderates, Republicans that are in the Philadelphia suburbs, if they hold on to their votes for Trump, then I think he very well could win. In fact, I think he will win. So I, even though Pennsylvania in presidential race has gone blue for a couple decades, it is in a lot of ways a red state, and it's also a working class state. Even in Philadelphia, it's a very working class, middle class state, and it's been ravaged. The factories in Pennsylvania, the industry in Pennsylvania has been ravaged through outsourcing. So Trump's blue collar message resonates.
Right.
So, and we know Democrats in Pennsylvania are willing to cross over and vote for Republicans. In fact, if you look at 2014, excuse me, midterm elections, the historic majority that Republicans have in Congress in Pennsylvania got there with the help of a lot of Democrat votes. They split the ticket. They voted for Democrat governor and Republican Congress people. So I think, despite what the polls say, I am going to call Pennsylvania for Trump.
Okay. and that the last time actually that Pennsylvania went red was the 1988 presidential election. Um, that would again that would be historic, just like with Virginia. Actually, it's been longer, considerably longer since Pennsylvania has gone for a Republican than Virginia. So it'd be more significant if Pennsylvania went red. But I think that it's more likely that the PA will go red than it is um, that Virginia will actually.
Yes, I agree. I think even I think slightly yes. Just because Pennsylvania is much more of a working class blue collar state than Virginia is, even in rural Virginia. But I will say this: we will probably one of the first states that will be called, just being due to being on the East Coast, will be Pennsylvania. If it is announced that Trump has won Pennsylvania, then I'm willing to guarantee he wins the election. We don't even I don't need to listen to the results anywhere else. Pennsylvania, if he wins Pennsylvania, he probably won Michigan, which we'll talk about. He probably won other states. And just because if he was able to overcome the obstacles Republican presidential candidates have, then that tells me he has done far better than previous Republicans in other purple and blue states.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, so Michigan. Let's talk about Michigan. This is they went from a swing state to being pretty solid for Hillary in the polls, and now back to being a swing state. So very interesting. We have let's see, the current numbers for Michigan. Clinton, we have three polls here, all conducted in the last week, and Clinton is roughly about 5 points ahead. Now, there's only three polls; it's not a whole lot to go on, but it's close enough that again, 5 points, voter turnout, voter suppression, depending on what goes on there, Michigan could actually go red. And again, that would be, let's see, the last time Michigan went red would be again the 1988 elections, so same as Pennsylvania.
Right, and Michigan is similar to Pennsylvania in a lot of ways, where a lot of the state is red, but you have a couple pockets of blue that generally swing the governor race and the presidential race. It's a blue collar working class state. I mean, Michigan, maybe even more so than Pennsylvania, but maybe just as much, has just been ravaged. Their industry is gone, their factories have gone. Trump had that brilliant line that he's used a few times where he said that it used to be you can't drink the water in Mexico, and you got your cars from Flint or whatever, and then now it's the opposite. I mean, it's it's just shocking how poorly Michigan as a state is doing, and a
Well,
lot of that.
look at
Go ahead.
Detroit. I mean, just Detroit. Half the population has left Detroit. It went from one of the most prosperous cities on the planet to a third world hellhole in a few decades. I mean, it's gentrified. The government as massive overreach, a tremendously Democrat-run government, as typical, and the city is destroyed. And there's nothing left. They're demolishing
Right.
entire city blocks to improve the land value.
Right, and it's funny you go back and watch the original RoboCop film, which was set in Detroit, and you think, oh, people at the time was like, oh, what a horrible version of Detroit. That'll never happen. There's crime everywhere, and I mean, well, here we are, minus RoboCop. So, yeah, it's
It's
and
just what the city needs right now.
I, absolutely. Um, so here's the thing: is Trump a couple months ago went to Detroit and gave a speech on the condition of the Michigan economy, but more so just the American economy in general. And he spoke directly to African Americans, and he said why he deserves their vote, why they should vote for him, and I think that really helped. So I think that I think that Black Americans and Black Michigans, they, I think you're going to see they're going to turn out for Trump, and I think that will be overall enough to push him over. I will predict Trump will win Michigan as well, which, according to our totals, means he's already won the presidency based on what I've been saying.
Yes, handedly.
Um, so, yeah, so I think he's going to do well in Michigan.
So we have two more. We'll say more minor states as far as the election is concerned. The Electoral College, Colorado and New Mexico. So let's go with Colorado. Colorado is we've seen Clinton has the average for the recent polls is a 3 point lead. There are some ties in there as well, but again, 3 points, margin of error, voter turnout could be a major um, could potentially shift for Trump. Now, Colorado voted Republican in 2004, in 2000, in 1996. They voted Democrat in 1992, but then you go back further than that, and it's pretty much a solid red state for most of the elections. So it's not too much of a stretch to think that they could swing back and be a red state in this election. I don't think that's a stretch at all.
Well, absolutely, and the fact that Trump went to New Mexico, he went to Albuquerque. I think he went somewhere else. I'm not sure, but the fact that he made a campaign stop, and again, it was like an impromptu campaign stop that just was spur of the moment. This past week shows that they must have confidence that they, if not will win it, but they must be competitive. Because you got to think that this is valuable resources that the Trump campaign could be using in states that they are more likely to win. And here they are spending time in places like Minnesota and New Mexico. So I have to believe that, according to their internals, that they're doing well right now. And I think, despite being on the border and despite being called New Mexico, there's a lot of Republicans there, and there's a lot of Democrats who vote Republican. And it is a minor state, but again, if he can overcome all of the barriers, then you I think there's a lot more registered Democrats in New Mexico. For instance, in the primary, I think between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, they both got over 200,000 votes, whereas the Republicans, even with like 6, 7 people on the ballot at that point, I think it was not even 100,000. So a lot more registered Democrats, but these are Democrats who vote Republican oftentimes.
Sure, and New Mexico has historically kind of shifted back and forth depending on the election from one party to another. The only thing that concerns me about New Mexico is the demographic shift that's going on due to immigration. Um, that could potentially change the outcome there. But in New Mexico, the polls, there's only two polls out, recent polls for New Mexico, and they have Clinton ahead 5-3, so an average of +4. Again, it's a close margin. Um, I think that if I had to call New Mexico and Colorado, I would. I think it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I'd probably call them for Clinton just to be safe, but I could very easily see both of them, especially Colorado, going for Trump. And I'm going to say, because I don't think I mentioned when we were talking about Michigan, I think that it's, again, it's more likely it's going to go for Clinton, but I don't quite want to call it. If I had to call it, I would say for Clinton. If I had to call New Mexico and Colorado, I think I'd split it. I'd give New Mexico to Clinton, I'd give Colorado to Trump.
Interesting, interesting. So you think the demographic shift has hit New Mexico harder than Colorado?
I don't have the facts and figures to back that up, so I'm not going to make that statement. But
Okay.
I'm concerned about. I think that they're very similar, but looking at, let's see, the previous voting record, we see, well, no, New Mexico went the same as Colorado in 2004. It's rough. I am not sure what to say as far as New Mexico and Colorado. Do you think that they're both going to go for Trump?
Um, Good question. I'll go ahead and call both of them, but I'm not confident in what I'm going to call. I'll go ahead and I would call. Oh, that's tough. I would go ahead and just call both for Trump.
Okay, so I'm just going to get some of these facts and figures here. I'm going to quickly add them up. So you called Florida, you're calling Pennsylvania. What about Virginia? What do you say about
Um,
Virginia?
I would have to. I think what I said was Hillary Clinton. Again, I'm not confident about that, but I will go ahead and stick with Hillary Clinton.
Okay, and Michigan.
Donald Trump.
Okay, so with that, we have a landslide of 320 electoral votes for Trump and 218 for Clinton.
Yes.
If all those if Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Colorado, New Mexico go for Trump and Virginia goes for Clinton, that is a massive landslide. Now, I would actually let me err on the side of caution here, and I'm going to give Michigan to Clinton, and I'm also going to give New Mexico to Clinton, and that still gets us a landslide of 299 for Trump and 239 for Clinton.
238 if you take off that one from Washington.
Oh yes, that's right. But the important takeaway here is that even at this level, uh, we can change Pennsylvania to Democrat, and it's still a 279 to 259 victory. Or we could even, I don't believe this is going to happen, but we could keep Pennsylvania in play and turn Florida for Clinton, and we could turn Colorado for Clinton, and then we have, well, then she wins. She wins by 277. But again, if we grab Michigan, it's 277 to 261. It's just these six states are so very important. Really just cannot overstate that. It's very, very critical. If you're listening to this and you one of 10 subscribers or something like that, and you're listening, you live in one of these states, highly recommend that you not only get out and vote, but talk to people that you know who may be undecided. You 2 days left. May be undecided. Maybe you aren't sure how they lean, and bring up some talking points that might help to encourage them to vote for Trump. These six states are going to be very, very, very important, and it's going to be this election is going to be based heavily on voter turnout. That's what it's going to come down to.
That's right. Do you have a guess on popular vote percentage?
Oh, I haven't even thought about that. Uh, yeah, you know what? I don't. I'd have to give that some careful consideration.
I think both the Electoral College and the popular vote, I don't think if Trump wins, it's not going to be close. Um, we already talked about the Trump slide in the Electoral College. With the popular vote, I would say he's going to win by 7 to 10%. I'll make that bold prediction.
Okay. And I do tend to side with you. I believe that it's possible that it could be a close election, but I think that the trend that goes through the voters in the United States is going to be a somewhat national trend, and that is that, as you said, like what happens in Florida will transfer in other places, and the same for Pennsylvania, and the same for Colorado. These are states where you see a pretty big mix of people and their political ideologies, and if he's able to take one of those states, it's probably going to take several others. So I see your point there about it as far as it probably being a landslide if he wins.
Right, right. So we went over all the states.
Yes, unless I'm missing some somewhere.
All right.
Let's talk about Hawaii and how important it is to the election. So that will give us. Let's get the official prediction then. The official prediction. I will go with you. Florida goes for Trump. I'm going to say Virginia goes for Clinton. I'm going to say Pennsylvania, going out on a limb here, but I'm going to say goes for Trump. I'm going to say Michigan goes for Clinton, and Colorado and New Mexico. I'm just going to give New Mexico to Clinton because I could be wrong, but I would think that one of those states in the Southwest is going to go for her. So we'll just give that one. And that's, again, 299 to 239. That would be a landslide. That would be certainly enough to overcome any accusations of voter fraud.
Right, right. Well, let's be honest. Even if Trump had 400 electoral votes, the media would not admit that it's a landslide. They would say it's a close election, and Hillary Clinton had a hard fought, and it was down to the wire.
So if our predictions are right, and it is a Trump landslide victory, how many cities do you think will be on fire by Wednesday?
That's a great question. Um, I don't care because I don't live in a city.
Yeah, so I'm just anxious to see if this does occur, which I hope that it does. I genuinely hope so. I'm anxious to see if the peaceful, progressive political figures and voters and supporters will continue their history of peaceful protest, or if there will be some rampant craziness that will go on. Of course, I'm not hoping for that. That would be awful. But it's just I can see it happening. I can see some riots.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Chicago, San Jose, California, um, may possibly a city in North Carolina, maybe Charlotte. You're going to have cities that will burn. I don't know how much, but you will see rioting, and unless it's a pretty convincing a super Trump slide, expect Hillary Clinton to contest it somehow. I mean, look, the Democrats still think that are still contesting the 2000 election.
Right.
So if Trump wins, they will never let that. I mean, the Bushes and Clintons are best friends anyway, so it's like whatever. But they will never let this go if Donald Trump wins.
And let's face it now. Also, it's not just this is not just the Democrats. This is the establishment. The rank and file GOP have been pretty much on the same team with the Democrats with this. Being people like Glenn Beck, who I cannot stand, and
Ugh.
some of the figures in the Republican Party have illustrated that they are completely part of this corrupt system. Trump is running as a Republican because you have to run in one party in the United States. It's a two-party system essentially, but he's running as a populist nationalist. He's not running as a an ideological Republican, and I think that people are fed up with the ideological Republican. A lot of people are fed up with the ideological Democrats too. I mean, that's what the whole thing with Bernie Sanders was about to a large extent. And even though I would argue that Bernie Sanders was, of course, very, very establishment in the end anyway. Um,
Right.
but this is the establishment. This election is critical. This is the certainly, without a doubt, the most important election that we have seen in our lives so far. It is going to be absolutely historic, no matter what happens. And I would argue if Hillary wins, it'll be historic because it'll be kind of like the final nail in the coffin for our country, and it'll then have a rather rapid decline afterwards. And if Trump wins, we will potentially have gotten perhaps a renewal, getting things back on track, maybe, hopefully. But things are pretty rough. I mean, I kind of think of we like to compare the United States to the Roman Republic and Roman Empire in a lot of ways, and it fits in a lot of ways. And Trump could be kind of an Augustus Caesar figure, although not an emperor, a president that could potentially usher in, our own kind of Pax Romana, a peace and stability era of recovery after a long period of decline. Whether or not that will happen remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful at least for that. This is the anti-establishment fighting the establishment. The establishment is going to do everything that they can to hold on to power, clawing and grabbing anything they can. And I'll make another prediction. If Hillary Clinton does win, they will enact during her term, they will enact so many laws, executive orders, anything that they possibly can to clamp down harder than ever before. They'll flood in more immigrants than ever before, so they can change the demographic uh, voting trends. They can buy votes. They'll try to buy more votes through welfare. They'll try to get cracking on hitting the Second Amendment. They're going to hit the First Amendment. They're going to crack down on the internet. They're going to crack down on alternative media. We see that happening already, and I really believe that this election, this is potentially the last democratic hope for this country before it shifts radically into something that is very, very far removed from anything that the framers of the Constitution envisioned.
Right. And for anybody out there wondering, uh, the Democrat Party, and especially Hillary Clinton and her team, uh, are in no way in favor of free speech and freedom of association. So if you value being able to communicate freely with other people, then you do not want to see Hillary Clinton elected. It's arguable whether she'll actually finish out her term. If the FBI does its job, which it's looking like it won't, but if it does, we very well could see uh, not only the first woman president impeached, but the first husband and wife presidents impeached, and we would have Tim Kaine as president. Do
Oh
you do,
my
do you out
God.
there want Tim Kaine as president? Nobody. Tim Kaine doesn't even want Tim Kaine as president. Tim Kaine's mother does not want Tim Kaine as president. Nobody wants Tim Kaine. So vote for Trump.
Yeah, and it's again just to the scandals, the corruption. Another thing to just mention is the connection with Middle Eastern interest that Clinton has. That alone, if I understand the law correctly, is a violation of federal law. In the funding for election campaigns cannot be part of a foreign government investment. But of course, it's done through, I believe it was done through the Clinton Foundation. So they kind of like wash their hands of that. Now, am I wrong about that? But I'm pretty sure that's illegal.
Right. There has been so much illegal activity from Hillary Clinton, it could fill 1,000 law books.
Oh,
But
and this is the champion for LGBT rights and women's rights, and she's taking money from a country that doesn't allow women to drive. If you happen to be raped, then it's your fault. If you're unfaithful to your husband, you can be stoned to death. And if you're gay, you can have your head chopped off. That doesn't sound like progressive values to me. That doesn't sound like feminist values to me. And I'm amazed at how many people just want to completely ignore that as if it's not happening.
oh, but you misunderstand. You see, Hillary Clinton is taking that money and putting it into her foundation, which provides water for poor people in Ethiopia.
Sure. And I'm sure the Saudis want nothing in return for that money. They were just giving out of the goodness of their progressive hearts.
Never mind that only 5% of the Clinton Foundation money actually went to helping people. But, if Satan gives you $1 million, would you take it? I mean, to give it to poor people? I mean, that's the argument.
Yeah, sure. But I think the one even bigger than that argument, and this has to be mentioned, and this is one of the major issues from the beginning of the election I watched as candidates over and over and over again indicated that they wanted to start cracking down on Russia. Now, for those of you who may not have studied history or been old enough to know, we spent over 40 years on the brink of nuclear war with Russia, and we put a lot of time and effort and money into getting out of that, and now we're just jumping right back in. Hillary Clinton has made it known on several occasions that she wants to enforce a no-fly zone in Syria. Syria is a sovereign country. They're allied with Russia. Russia has air bases in the region. They have an aircraft carrier that was just sent there for support. We have an aircraft carrier in the region. And she said, I think it was in the last debate, that after Mosul falls, we need to push on to Aleppo. Well, Aleppo's in a different country. It's called Syria. And Syria is allied with Russia. And then she's mentioned several times we need to enforce this no-fly zone. Well, how do you think a no-fly zone is enforced? Do you say, well, you can't fly anymore? Okay. Well, the Russians said they're not going to agree to that. So how are you going to enforce it? By shooting their planes down. That's known as war. War with Russia would be a very bad thing. I have no problem with Russia. I would like to be friends with Russia, and Donald Trump has said the same thing, which is one of the reasons I was very happy with his foreign policy. He wants to, quote, bomb the hell out of ISIS. I have no issue with that. But he does not want to get involved in these lengthy, stupid ground wars like in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they say, oh, but he said he was for the war. No, he said on Howard Stern at the very beginning of the war, he said, he was asked, well, what do you think of, should we go to a war in Iraq? And he was like, well, yeah, I guess so. That was his response. If that's an endorsement, you can weigh that against the other 100 times he said we shouldn't have. But point being, we can't afford a war. Financially, we can't afford it uh, personally to see more Americans coming back in body bags. Fighting the Russians, by the way, fighting the Russians is not like fighting Iraq. It's not like fighting Iraqis. It's not like fighting the Afghans. Okay, this is a major world power. If we go to war with Russia, even if it's not a nuclear war, even if it's just a regular on the ground war, if we're actually fighting with the Russians, we will lose tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of American soldiers. There is no way that can happen without us having just massive, massive casualties, and our economy would collapse as a consequence as well. Russia has almost no public debt. We have up to now $165,000 per taxpayer at almost $20 trillion, increasing about $1 trillion every single year. That's not sustainable. And my fear is that the Clintons and the establishment want a war with Russia to take the focus off of our corrupt, nonsensical political system, which is, of course, straight out of Orwell. And we need to be aware of this. We need to not fall for the propaganda. And we need to, I believe, definitely never be willing to say that going to war with Russia over some of these stupid, petty interference wars in the Middle East, fighting religious wars on behalf of Saudi Arabia, this is not something we want to get involved in. We need to focus on our people. We need to focus on making our country stable, making it prosperous again. That's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take years. Even if Trump gets elected, he pulls all the switches and the levers in just the right ways, it's going to be hard, and it's going to take years. We passed the point of an easy solution to these issues a long time ago, and we need to remember that this is not a normal election. This is not a minor affair. This is not in any way something that we want to take lightly. And again, if you're listening out there and you're thinking about, maybe you're undecided, you don't want to go out and vote, or you say, well, I don't like Trump either, think about these issues. Think about these issues moving forward. Think about the Supreme Court and how we're going to have to live probably for the next 30, 40 years with the justices that are selected by the next president. We're looking at a very radically different America under a Clinton administration. The same corruption, the same establishment, the same crap that's been going on for the past several decades, pulling all the wealth out of our country, potentially turning into a somewhat totalitarian kind of state, I believe. Because at some point, the only way they'll be able to enforce it is to get more and more strict. So I really emphasize that everyone gets out and votes for Trump. I know he's not perfect. Clearly, he's not perfect, but this is a very, very serious time we're living in.
Right, and I understand there's a lot of people out there who may be looking forward to voting for the first female president, and they like the idea of a woman president, and I understand that, and I encourage anybody who's leaning that direction to certainly vote for what would be the first female president. I know it's shocking. So everybody in those 6 critical states we referred to earlier, please go out and vote for the first female president. Please vote Jill Stein. Um, don't waste your vote on Hillary Clinton. She's may not even be a woman. I'm not sure, but
And
but
let me just say, Donald Trump could be a a female transsexual Martian, and I would still vote for him slash her. Gender has absolutely nothing to do with this. Elections should be about the issues and about getting what needs to be done accomplished.
Right, and I'm waiting for the Hillary Clinton slogan, "I'm with Z" or "I'm with Zer," instead of "I'm with her." Um, I maybe that's a joke that went over people's heads, but yeah, certainly. I think we're both on the same page with who we encourage people to vote for. Speaking as somebody who generally doesn't believe in the political process nor voting, I think we can all make one exception this time and vote for clearly the not just the lesser of two evils, but uh, we're voting for. I mean, you're this election. The choice is between evil and not so much. I mean, if you vote for Hillary Clinton, what you're telling the elites, what you're telling Washington D.C., what you're telling the politicians, the CEOs, the corporations, um, the anybody in who has connections that you don't. What you're telling them is that you endorse corruption, you endorse criminality, you endorse violence and intimidation of political opponents, you endorse voter fraud, you endorse just name calling and nastiness towards people that you disagree with. That's what you're doing. You're not voting for Hillary Clinton. You are endorsing a set of principles and you are sending a signal to the elites that all of those things are acceptable. And I would encourage you to think about that and make your choice accordingly. Because whether you vote for a third party, whether you don't vote at all, whether you vote for Donald Trump, what you're doing by voting for Hillary Clinton is you're not voting for her, you're voting for the idea uh, that laws apply to you, but they don't apply to the people at the top.
Yeah, exactly. And that sets a very dangerous precedent because from from there on forward, if she's elected, we can expect the government to. I mean, look at all this blatant, rampant corruption they haven't even tried to cover up. It's everywhere. If they can win in spite of that, imagine what they'll do. Imagine what they'll do behind the scenes. Imagine the things that they will do, knowing that they can get away with that. Horrific. I mean, we could be talking about some very, very troubling things.
Right, right. Um, you want to take a guess on maybe have a little fun and guess how well Jill Stein and Gary Johnson
Oh,
will do?
sure, sure. Let me just, I want to see what the polls are at with them right now, out of curiosity. And this is a national poll from the RCP. These are the aggregates. So Gary Johnson is currently the RCP claims that Clinton has 44.9%, Trump has 42.7%, Johnson has 4.8%, and Stein has 1.8%. Um, I am going to say, well, we obviously know that I believe the Trump and Clinton numbers are off. Uh, but I'm going to say Johnson is going to get 3%, and Stein is going to get 1%, around 1%.
That sounds pretty reasonable. I would actually say Gary Johnson will get 2% and Jill Stein will get less than 1%. I think at the beginning of the general election, everybody was saying that, especially in the Libertarian Party and Libertarian Party supporters, Gary Johnson being the Libertarian Party nominee, that this is the year. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are so unlikable that this is the year that Gary Johnson and the Libertarian Party can break through. And over time, his percentages kept shrinking and shrinking. I think perhaps if the Libertarian Party had a better spokesperson, uh, that may not have been the case. Um, but Gary
Oh, you mean
Johnson,
somebody who doesn't just start like chewing on his tongue in the middle of an interview,
uh huh.
or somebody who
Well,
actually knows like the name of maybe two foreign leaders?
when you were talking about Aleppo earlier, I was about to break out an Aleppo. What is Aleppo joke? But no, it's So I think the Libertarian Party will be rightly embarrassed by their 2% showing. I think what you see now, a lot of support for the third party, the people who claim to support. You have a situation where, and it's not just people who will vote for Trump, but even Clinton, people who are polled who, again, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have such high unfavorability ratings that people don't want to admit that they support them, even
Right.
if they do. So what you're seeing is people who, well, no, I don't support either one of them. I support Gary Johnson because I heard him once on MSNBC. So when it all comes down to it, even the people who really do think they support Gary Johnson, even up to this point, when they're in the voting booth and they're by themselves, I think those people will break one way or the other. I think Trump will be the beneficiary of most of the I think he'll be the beneficiary of most of the Gary Johnson votes. A lot of passionate Bernie Sanders people, I think, will either break for Jill Stein, they won't vote at all, or they'll vote for Trump, and a few will vote for Hillary Clinton. But I think she's going to be the beneficiary of a lot of his votes. But combined, I can't see them breaking 4%. But I would be surprised if Gary Johnson did better than 2%.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Our bold predictions for Tuesday night. Do you have anything you want to add to any of that?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right, I do too. I do as well. So hopefully we're going to be spot on, and after the election, our channel is going to go up to what you say about 5 million subscribers overnight, something like that. And
Yes,
we're going to become professional commentators. We're actually going to get hired by a major news network, and then we're going to be able to get out of the working class life.
exactly. We will have enough subscribers that we will have the privilege to be censored by YouTube.
Yeah, precisely, precisely. All right. Well, thank you for everyone, all of the listeners. Again, I wanted to reiterate that if we do get more subscribers, if we start getting a larger following, I'm going to add more than just the audio. It takes a lot of time to edit videos and put things in to make it nice here and there. So right now it's just an audio only show, but I will be adding more of that if we see that there is a desire to have more of this kind of content, but with some more visual amenities added to it. I'm also going to be investing in a better microphone soon, so you have that to look forward to as well. You won't have to listen to the little crackliness in the voice. So I really encourage you, please get out, vote for Trump, please. We really, Western civilization is depending on you. Our future children, and for that matter, us, we ourselves are depending on you. So have a happy election day, and I would say keep either a bottle of champagne or a bottle of vodka handy.
Or poison.
Or poison, just in case. Just keep a nice, keep your arsenic bottle right next to the champagne, just in
That's
case.
right.
All right.